We met earlier in November, right? Hey, Jimmy, why are we having a meeting Friday in transportation?
We Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to the Public Pension Oversight Board meeting.
I haven't heard that yet. Thank you for telling me.
We will call the meeting to order, and if you would, Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Senator Berg, Senator Carroll, Senator McDaniel, Senator Mills,
Here.
Senator Neal, Senator Nemus,
Present.
Senator Wilson,
Here.
Representative Bojanowski, Representative Duval,
Here.
Representative Fleming, Representative Graham,
Here.
Representative Petrie, Representative Pratt, Representative Tipton, Auditor Allison Ball.
Here.
John Hicks, Victor Maddox, Sharon Mattingly, Representative Hale, Senator Higdon,
Here.
Representative Johnson.
Here.
Okay. We do have a quorum, and so with that, ask for a motion for approval of the minutes from our last meeting. We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you all for being here today. We'll get right to it. We have first on the agenda is Kentucky Deferred Comp. Okay, Chris, if you, when you're ready, identify yourself for the record, and the floor is yours.
Yes, sir. Is the mic on? Yeah, there we go. All right, thank you for having us. I brought Scarlett Murphy with us today. She's in charge of our communications internally and manages our nationwide vendors on all things marketing and communications. And we've got a couple of pieces today to highlight that. But first and foremost, the 50th anniversary. So we are celebrating our 50th anniversary. We instigated the 457 plan in 1974. And so you see our merchandise in the green pig. AUM, we've surpassed 4.3. We're a little over that now. And as you see, 86,607 participants and going up. We are a growing plan. Let's go ahead. This is why we are a growing plan. Auto enroll. The impact has been tremendous. We have added over 20,000 participants in a little over 5 years. I want you to look specifically at the average deferral amounts. We've enrolled them at $30 a month, and through our communication efforts, again, what you're going to see here, we've been able to get that up to $140, which is much more appropriate to meet the goals. The average account balance, too, so if you take the mean average of that, it's a little over $1,000, and through either them putting more of their own money in and or appreciation through the market, there's a $1,400 surplus there, so we're very proud to see progress in that department as well. The total amount from auto enroll has put $34 million into the pockets of our employees. These are, we did a 3-year communication targeted marketing plan around the increments, the 8, the 6, and the 3. And we wanted to highlight how impactful that was and what these employees were going to do with that money. And this is really just to demonstrate some of the marketing pieces so you can see what it looked like on the left. And this is all in your material as well. This was another one. And here are the results. So I think if you look at the first column, this is a little hard to read, but for 2022, our average is about a little over 400, with the targeted marketing around timing it before. We had several communications both before, during, and after the increment. We were able to increase that. We doubled the numbers, and that brought in an additional $1.5 million. 23 was even better. We did almost 1,200 deferral increases in that month. That's extraordinary. Another 2.2, and then this year we did it again, another doubling, and so the total's about a little over $5 million for a bunch of free emails. Quite frankly, it's been very successful. We have taken this task and basically we're applying targeted marketing to everything we do and looking for opportunities to take advantage and get the message out, and it's working. So we want to encourage you. The increment really helps. They're investing in themselves. They're not squandering this. They're putting it away for a rainy day, and we're growing it for them. So I just wanted to highlight that and show it off. 2025 legislation, this is going to sound like a little bit of a broken record. It's the same as it was last year. We want a codified fiduciary standard. We pulled some of that language out of Judicial and a little bit out of KPPA. We don't have one right now. We're going by a common law standard. We think that's just something that needs to be fixed. And then the purchasing of the fiduciary liability insurance. We do purchase fiduciary liability insurance, but for liability's sake and several other reasons, we want that to be hard-coded into the statute that's permissible. The self-correcting mechanism, I believe this is the one we adopted verbatim out of Judicial. There's been more changes in the last 4 years in the federal tax code than there has in the last 40 with the Secure Acts and whatnot. And it's been a real challenge we have to come back over here every time to change every little nook and cranny. And so what we're asking for is to add that same language to allow us to comport to federal law when it changes. And then the most exciting in my book is this authorization to allow us to offer a self-directed brokerage account. And there's a lot of benefits to this. It gives you a wider range to get outside of the core menu into alternatives and or, again, ESGs for those that want it. It's an egalitarian approach to not get off making money the old-fashioned way, but it does allow you to go invest in oil companies or windmills or whichever you prefer. And we haven't there'll be discussions on how much of your account you can move into that, but we're modeling off of TSP. They've had one for several years, and that's the largest DC plan in the world. They've done a good job with that, and I think that's where we want to go to. The main reason I want to do it in ERISA world and private sector, there's about a 2% take on a self-directed brokerage window, which is pretty low. However, the average account balance is 7.5 times larger for those that use that window compared to a regular participant that does not. And so that seems like a lot of low-hanging fruit to me. So I would encourage you to support this. We are working with LRC and Mr. Gross. We're seeking sponsorship and approval. So any support you could put on our bill, we would really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Chris, for explaining the bill. That kind of on a checklist that checks off that you have to bring any pension bill before PPOB, and we can check that off our list that you've done that.
Yes, sir.
We also, well-kept secret of what you all provide, the financial advice, that you might touch on that.
Yes.
I hear great testimonies about what you have done with that, and if you don't mind.
Certainly. We've after auto-enroll, we moved to put in free certified financial planning. So we do offer that service free to any participant. That is uncanny. Most ordinary folk don't get access to that, certainly not for free and on demand. We've had, what was the number? 1,200? Yeah, roughly about 1,200 have gone through that. It's not a huge number, but what we see is about an 80% plus, we call it recidivism, or how about a repeat rate? They come back, and they come back again and again, and the advice is, it's just really wonderful what we've been able to produce with that. We've had people walk out of there with tears of joy and problem solved, and just with general knowledge they didn't have before about their situation, and it is really detailed. It can be as detailed as you want it to be, from health care to adopting a child to A to Z.
Okay. Auditor Ball has a question.
Yes.
Thank you, Chris. It's good to see you, and I've served on this board for a while,
Yes,
so
ma'am.
I'm well familiar with a lot of the work you do, and you do a good job. I've got a question on the fiduciary duty language that you're looking at, and I remember we had some discussions about that in the past, and you talked about using the KPPA model. It's going to have to be pretty different from the KPPA, though, because of the
It
right.
is. We did chop it up a little bit, and if you look in the bill, and I didn't bring the bill to discuss in depth, but we can. It's bits and pieces to suit us, because we're very similar, but we are not alike. A different species of apple, perhaps, if you will. So when we wrote it, we did know that it's not lifted directly out. Portions of Judicial, I think when we used that, it was verbatim, but it fit the mold. On the fiduciary portion, though, I believe it's bits and pieces.
Yeah, and part of the concern with that would be a lot of that language was drafted specifically to address the ESG issue, which is different for you. You've got a different
Right.
approach because you're responsive to the individual owners. But that would be something that I would be really looking at before.
Yeah, I'll
we're jumping
definitely
into
take a look at that. Again, we try to keep it straight down the middle, and we do have other solutions for that issue. But yeah, we'll be happy to take a look at that for you.
Chris, thank you too for explaining the auto enroll. I know that's been, prior to legislation several years ago, you had to opt in to deferred comp. The legislation was very common sense. Is no, you need to opt out, and 94% of the new employees, new hires are staying. So
That's still unsurpassed, sir. With the national meeting of with other plans, we're constantly hit up for information about, tell me about auto enroll and how did you do this, and what about anti-garnishment provisions, and just all kinds of interest in the program, and it's just been really, really successful.
well, thank you, and I see no further questions. Anything else you have to add?
No, sir. Just
All
again, we always appreciate the support.
Well, thank you, and okay. Okay. Thank you. That we're good. Thank you
Okay.
very much.
Thank you much.
Next up is Bo Craycraft. It's and good nickname for you would be Brief Bo.
I can do that for sure. For the record, my name is Bo Craycraft. I'm the Executive Director of the Judicial Forum Retirement System. As always, it's good to be here with you. I appreciate the time, even if it is brief. And I will definitely do that. I've been asked today to provide some results from our most recent actuarial valuations. And so I've put together just a couple of slides. And to be honest with you, the information you're going to see from us this morning is quite different from what you're going to hear from with regards to TRS and KPPA. We, as a smaller plan, we're not required to do full funding valuations every year like my two larger counterparts. And so on those odd years, we just do a roll forward valuation solely for the purpose of creating GASB results, which are required for the Commonwealth's financial statements. As most of you all know, GASB, or the Government Accounting Standards Board, they created new reporting requirements back in 2013. And so since that date, in these even year numbered years, we have just done what is called a roll forward valuation. And so I have included the information. It's going to look, like I said, quite a bit differently than what you're going to hear from both KPPA and TRS. It is, again, solely for the purpose of accounting and to create what is commonly referred to as a net pension liability and or asset. And so primary difference with the numbers that you're going to see from us here reflected on page 3. I've also included a 5-year look back on slide 5 just for your records. But the most notable difference is right there in the middle of the page. The liability is being compared to the market value of assets. It's also called the net plan position. And so when you talk about a funding valuation or for budgetary purposes or for a recommended employer annual contribution, you're going to reflect that liability versus a smooth or actuarial value of asset. And in the case of us, our GASB value for assets has been quite a bit higher here recently because of the smoothing effect. But anyways, what you can see there is a total liability versus an actual market value as of June 30 of 2024. And then in the case of all 4 of our plans, we have a net pension asset, which then is reflected on the Commonwealth's financial statements. We will do a full funding valuation in 2025. We do that in each odd-numbered year, and I know we come here usually in October and provide the results to that, but that will be the basis for any budget request that we have as we look forward to the 2026 session. So with that, I don't have any other comments. I did want to follow up on one question that I got from October, but I would pause first if there's any questions with regards to the presentation.
Please proceed. I see no questions.
Awesome. During the October meeting, when we were reviewing some of the membership data, I believe Senator Wilson had a question with regards to health insurance participation. And so I just wanted to follow up on that. In October, I reflected, and let's focus on LRP first. We had, and I don't have this data, sorry, this is a verbal update. We had 260 monthly recipients. So members or survivors receiving a benefit on a monthly basis. Out of that 260, 154 members or recipients were participating in health insurance. Now, we do also have a dependent subsidy program. So we also, in addition to that number, have some spouses or children that are covered. The total cost on the premium side is around $100,000 a month for LRP, with members paying about 15% of that. The plan paying the difference. And then on JRP, we had just over 405 participants. 315 were participating in the health insurance plan. The cost there, of course, is a little bit higher because the number is higher. So it's $235,000 a month. And on that side, members are paying about 10%. Again, we talked about, judges tend to have a little bit longer term. And so their percent of the premium being paid is a little bit higher based on that average service.
Bo,
was that brief enough?
It was brief, and you explained it well because there's no questions. Thank you, sir. KPPA, Brian Barlow, you're up. Identify yourself for the record if you don't mind, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, it's first. Gotcha. Ryan Barrow, Executive Director, KPPA.
Rebecca Adkins, Deputy Executive Director, KPPA.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here today to report on what potentially is our most important study. It's up there with the ACFR, the valuations. So kind of what we were going to go through, again, brief, but what we hope to accomplish today is just to touch on the actuarial cycle that actually can span longer than a year. Talk about our 2049 target. I think we're going to talk a little bit more about that in the future, kind of that end goal. Some comments or takeaways from the study itself. in terms of membership count, payroll, and then just get to the bottom line, the funding status and the rates. So the cycle really begins with the setting of the assumptions, the mortality tables, those types of things are set at the board level. Then they roll into the valuations itself, and there's some sensitivity analysis that are produced in the 100-plus page report. Encourage you to refer to that, some projections and other statutory reporting, the actuary. And it brings us to today, where we bring it to PPOB. Prior to that, it was sent into LRC, and the boards have had a briefing on the study itself. Then next month, we're going to have the adoption of the rates. It really applies more for the C side than the K side because we have a biennial budget, but there will be adoption on the C side of the rates that have changed that I'm going to talk through in a couple slides, and then they go effect in the beginning of the fiscal year. In terms of kind of what we're doing today, we're really talking about what's happened over the last year in the valuation, but we didn't want to lose sight of the future when we have those accrued benefits and the funds would have enough to pay what's accrued, not in the future. And that was set in 2019. It was a 30-year closed amortization. Think of a 30-year home loan. It was closed, and it was 25 years left to amortize. So in 2049, we'll have enough money in the pot based on these assumptions to be able to pay the benefits that are accrued at that time. We've made a lot of progress. We're going to talk about that in a minute, but we're not there yet. But that's the long-term target we don't want to lose sight of. So kind of what we're distilling down today on the pension side, good news. Across all 5 funds, the status has improved. Now, again, we still have 25 years to pay on the loan, so it's improvement. It's not major improvement, but it's very positive, and it is improvement. On the insurance side, 4 of the 5 funds are fully funded, meaning 100% or 100% funded status. I will say we said this last month that on the insurance side, there is a lot of volatility because really that rate, we all know the CPI on insurance and healthcare is far exceeded, at least in recent history, just general inflationary pressures. So there is volatility, and kind of what we talked about in that meeting, the Inflation Reduction Act that really had a lot of additional costs in Medicare that would benefit the members. That obviously had an increase in the expenditure side, but to some extent that was lessened by the non-Medicare premiums. They were a little lower than anticipated. So I think those two things moving in conjunction is what you see on the numbers. And then I always want to take the opportunity to thank for supplemental funding. That has drastically moved the needle on the K side. Hundreds of millions of dollars spread out through various budgets have had a big impact on the actuarial valuations, and they will to come due to smoothing. On the investment side, we had a presentation a couple months ago related to the investments, and that's just direct rate of return over the year. We talked at that time, we exceeded the actuarial assumptions. This is a little different way to look at investment experience, the main change being smoothing. So there's a really high year of investment gains, a really poor year of investment losses. It's not immediately recognized. It is smoothed over a 5 years. So there is a little bit of a lag on the investment returns from an actuarial standpoint. So on the C side, strong returns on the actuarial 11 exceeded the assumed rate of return. Same story on the K side, really a range from 9 to 11% due to asset allocation, but again, exceeded all the actuarial assumed rate of returns.
Wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about some of the things that GRS, our actuary, brought to the boards when they presented to these boards. They focused a lot on active member payroll, so the payroll that's coming from the folks who are currently participating. We've seen quite a bit of increase in payroll in that, from 8% in CERS non-hazardous to 23% in KERS hazardous. This had an effect on the funded liability increases. So the actuary recalculates how much of what's the current liability amount every year For CERS, they saw a $284 million increase in pension, and K saw 434. Generally, this was attributable to these increases in payroll. They look at a lot of factors, but that was kind of the biggest impact on that, on
Could
those
I
pieces.
ask you a question on that, on the increase in payroll? Is that primarily from raises or new employees or both?
We'll look at some numbers, but the payroll count went up by about 3%, 2 to 3% in K and C, the non-hazardous ones, the ones we'll look at closely. But the payroll's still up 8 and 15%. So some of that is payroll increases.
Okay.
But it's both of them play a part. Okay, in insurance, we saw the same thing, but again, Ryan's already talked to you about that. A lot of that was the Inflation Reduction Act that was offset slightly by the lower ones in under Medicare not eligible. Okay, the next one, we're looking at membership counts. So on the left, you have CERS non-hazardous. On the right, you have K non-hazardous. They are up. This is a 10-year look. But the last 2 years, of looking 23 to 24, we're up by 2.1% in C non-hazardous. But over the last 10 years, they're actually down by 0.1%. So GRS was really careful to talk to the boards about not saying that right now our trends are 6 and 8% increases to payroll, that they want to look much longer than just the last 2 or 3 years because, of course, COVID played such a big place. You'll look on both sides. There was a dip in the COVID, and we're coming back out of it, but we're still not where we were 10 years ago, nor will we may not get back there. I don't know that K non-hazardous will ever get back up to 40,000. Okay, so the K non-hazardous on the right was up 3.4% year over year, 23 to 24, but up 2.2% for 10 years. Looking at the money membership payroll, K is up 8% for the 1 year, but 3.3% for the 10 years. I'm sorry, that was C. I said K. CERS on the left is up 8.8% for 1 year, year over year, and 3.3% for the 10 years. Their assumption is 2%. For KERS non-hazardous, they're up 15% year to year, 23 to 24, but only 1.7% for the 10-year period. In October, you asked us to look, when we were looking at payroll numbers, you asked us to look at mean versus averaging. We're still working on that. We don't have that for you today, but we'll get that to you. Retired membership counts. So how are we increasing the number of annuitants? You've got CERS again on the left and K again on the right. And we've got those percent changes. They're going up. CERS is going up about 2% a year. This is the count of retirees. State police is going down a little bit. State police is so little, and because of their classes, theirs fluctuates a little bit more. KERS non-hazardous is almost flat at less than 1%, as is K hazardous. And then we're looking at total distributions in those amounts, total money. So totals for the fiscal year 23 to 24, we went from $2.4 billion out of the system in pensions to $2.5 billion. And you can see C non-hazardous is up by about 5%, C hazardous almost 8%, K hazardous again less than 1%, K non-hazardous is less than 1%. K hazardous is 2.5% almost, and state police is completely flat. Overall, that is about 3.5% up.
Okay, so getting to the bottom line, actually, if you could draw your attention to the bottom red box in terms of the funding ratios. So what we talked about, the pension systems, are positive across the board. So there's, again, given the 25-year amortization, there's a little bit of positivity when we look at this year over year, which is kind of what we're focused on today. And then moving up in terms of the actuarial determined rate, you basically have the normal cost. That's what you kind of accrue as you go on. And then we have the administrative expense and the amortization cost. That's the catch-up. That should in 2049 should go to zero. and we would just then carry forward the normal cost. On the investment side, or excuse me, insurance side, as I stated, the plans for the 5 and for both the C, they're in excess of 100% funding. These rates will be adopted by the board in December, so they're draft at this point. And then on the K side, for both KRS and state police, obviously the biennial budget. So the 24 numbers, again, when you look at the funding ratios, those have improved. But on the rate side, those will not change due to, they're in the budget for the duration. So those for the CRS, which you see in front of you, are considered for information purposes only. I won't read the numbers to you, but I will point out one on the case side. My predecessor, I'm assuming is watching at home, got to report a funding ratio of 12.9. So 24.8 is a lot of movement in the positive direction. But as I stated, we still have ways to go for the remaining 25-year amortization. Just flipping over to the state police, kind of the same story in terms of the funding ratios, improvement and information item on the determined rates. And just kind of to close, we put an appendix here. You can show your friends and family over the holidays that information. Or you can look at it yourself. Really, it just gives some historical information over time since that ever important date, 2019. And then some valuations in terms of contributions and total dollars in the appendix. And with that, we're happy to take any questions.
Yes, Senator McDaniel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Ryan, thank you. Obviously, we saw payroll growth in there as we talked about. Is GRS putting that payroll growth into the assumptions that they're using for the ARC at this point?
Yes, there is a base payroll assumption for each plan in there. As Rebecca said, it's not been changed due to the longer term nature. But yes, there is payroll assumptions built in the actuarial. So I don't have those numbers at the top of my head. Do you?
CERS is 2% and K is 0%.
Okay. So we still aren't building payroll growth into the K assumption.
Yeah, if
Did,
you
we,
look
did
at,
we change that in statute several years? Because remember we were at 4 and there was that big controversy and it went to 0.
it is not in statute. They do look at it every year. GRS is absolutely watching this. There was actually a lot of conversation for both boards about payroll and are we at the right place, looking specifically at each plan. They're still not ready to say that this is the long-term trend. There are other payroll. So we have the standard payroll growth assumption. That's 2 and 0%. But there's also a separate assumption based on, I want to be careful because I don't know enough about the weeds. I want to tell you, you can look at it in the ACFR and it's spelled out, and they look at the payroll growth and they break it down by, where you are in your career, how many months you have and what your payroll growth might be. That so they look at it really extensively, far more detail than what we've brought to you this morning. So they're not ignoring it. It is kind of a nationwide pattern that they're seeing across the board, and right now actuaries just in general are taking a pretty conservative approach. This is the safest approach, is to leave it at the assumption lower than what our experience is, so that we don't have negative experience. But no, they're not taking action yet, but yes, they're looking closely at it.
So I would like, Mr. Chair, if I may, just briefly, and I appreciate the conservative approach to it. We saw when we went too far the other direction and let that pendulum swing too far. But I would encourage you, as they approach next year's valuation, to try to get them to, my sentiment is there's going to be more regularity to payroll growth than we've seen in the past. And I would like to encourage them to take a look at, instead of, a 2 and a 0, the C side, while relevant to us through AOC, is not as relevant as the K side. And I'd really like to see them take a look at an assumption that there is some growth. Now, if it's actuarially unsound, I don't want them to do that either, right? But I think it's probably more of a trend at this point that you will see some. Thank you.
Yes, and I'll just add one thing to that too on the case side. It is not necessarily as impactful because you can see here, this is from the appendix, kind of the normal cost calculation, just about 8.44. I'll use the hazardous column. The amortization cost is a set dollar amount. So the vast majority of that rate really doesn't have any bearing on payroll, but I do concede, and we did have, as Rebecca said, a lot of discussions around kind of that payroll assumption with the boards.
Thank you. You mentioned the contribution rates changing. I see on, I think, slide 17. You discuss the contribution rates for 25, changing in 25. Could you explain those, if you don't mind?
17.
Is this the page you're looking at?
In the appendix,
Yes.
page 17? Yes.
Yeah, slide 17.
So the CERS rates will change if the board approves them as they're recommended by the actuary. So what's seen there with a little asterisk at 35.73 is only if the board approves them at that rate. But that's the recommendation from the actuary. KERS non-hazardous, we kept those rates the same year to year. 23.74 because that's what the budget bill from last year approved.
My question to you is, and to the board, why would a fund that's 56% funded, why would they reduce contribution rates? Just because the actuary recommends it. Why wouldn't they do the Dave Ramsey approach and keep driving? And you have retirees that would probably ask you the same question because they're looking for the day when we're 100% funded and they get a COLA.
Yes. Can you forward 2 pages? So still in the appendix. No, I'm sorry. I'm down. I lied. Keep going. One more. Sorry. Okay. So because of their payroll growth, they're actually going to get more in contributions, but the rate itself is going down. But they expect the overall contribution total to be up by $13 million in non-hazardous and by $4 million in hazardous.
Yeah. My question still remains a common sense question. Why would we reduce contribution rates when we're 56% funded? That's my question to your board, and hopefully they will vote to leave it as is, so we can dig ourselves out of this hole a little quicker.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we certainly can carry that forward. You know, any additional contributions would go to amortize the unfunded liability. So these numbers are just predicated on the assumptions in that cycle that I showed, voted on by the board. But certainly, as I stressed, they take a vote in December. We can carry that message forward. And, you know, like I said, the excess would go to potentially shorten the amortization period, or certainly lower the unfunded liability.
We'll be watching to see what they do. That'd be very interesting. Hopefully they make a good decision on that. We heard today in License and Occupation about the money from sports betting that's coming headed toward the retirement system. What funds does that go into, or if you haven't received it yet and you haven't decided that, or
we would look to Secretary Hicks on that one.
Yeah.
Secretary Hicks?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Glad I could contribute.
Well, when we have money, it's exciting to hear where it's going.
It goes into a fund called the Permanent Pension Fund, but basically it's a parking lot because it has to be appropriated to its ultimate disposition by the General Assembly. So right now it's just racking up money, sitting still, earning interest, but it's not benefiting the pension plans yet until the General Assembly directs it to do so.
Yes, sir. Can you share with us how much is parked so far?
I knew that the other day. Over $50 million from the sports wagering right now, roughly, and Well, and there's another complication that I'll talk to Senator McDaniel about.
Okay. All right. Well, that's positive news. Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, I got it.
Senator Mills?
I got a question. So how, for Budget Director Hicks, how long was that $50 million? How long did it take to accumulate?
First year.
Well, that since we started sports wagering, just a little under a year.
Okay, so it is years. So it's maybe about a $60 million issue, possibly, something like that.
I mean, it's growing nicely. I will say that. And I think at the chairman's meeting, at Licensed Occupation, they were talking about how it's almost double what the original estimate was for the first 12 months.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Byrd?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a comment. I just want to say that I personally very much appreciate that you include the 10-year data, because I think it gives us a way to look at this in a longer term, which not everybody has been doing, and so I really thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Okay. Please proceed if you...
That concludes our remarks.
Okay. Seeing no further questions, thank you for being here, and thank you for those very good positive report. That's a step in the right direction. We like good news. Thank you. Next up, TRS, Bo Barnes. Bo, welcome to the committee, and as usual, identify yourself for the record, and the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Bo Barnes with Teachers Retirement System. I serve as the Deputy Executive Secretary and General Counsel for TRS. And Mr. Chair, I'd like to note that I would also be happy to be known as Be Brief Bo, but
well, I was going to say not so brief, Bo, and I didn't say that, but I knew you wouldn't be as brief as
well. I've been
American Bo.
I've been asked to provide some information about the 2024 actuarial valuation for TRS and some budget data, and with that, I will proceed. First, just some key findings for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2024. This is a great news slide. We again received full funding for the annuity and health insurance trust. So great news there. This marks, again, I've said this before, 10 straight years of full or very, very nearly full funding for the retirement annuity trust. Great news. And by nearly full in 2017, we received 99% of what we requested or needed, and in 2018, we received 97%. So I'm going to call that full funding. And also, within this budget, there was a separate appropriations bill that provided additional $80 million to TRS to be paid quarterly over the 2 years of the biennium. Again, we're very appreciative of this additional funding. We're very thankful, and so are Kentucky's teachers. The retirement annuity trust funded ratio improved to 59.1%. We're going to show some more numbers in detail on the next slide. TRS-4, the newest benefit account type for individuals who became members on or after January 1st, 2022, continues to be fully funded. It has a very high funded status because of the money that's coming into it. So great, it's working like it was planned. It's working perfectly. So great news there. And we have TRS-4 is larger than TRS-1 now. And with the start of the school year, TRS-4 probably has more people in it than TRS-2. So, I mean, and that's great news because it does a lot of things, but one, should any unfunded liability develop in TRS-4, and our actuaries don't see anyone, and the numbers we're seeing don't show any, imminent unfunded liability. It's 146% funded as of June 30th, 2024. But if that were to happen for some reason, the state of Kentucky would have no responsibility or obligation for that unfunded liability. The Board of Trustees would have to take action to get the funded status back in line with 100%. So good news there. Health Insurance Trust continues to show strong improvement, moving to 80.4%. Again, more detailed numbers on the next slide. And both trusts, retirement annuity and health insurance, are on track with this full funding to be fully funded within their amortization periods. So all good news. Here's the breakdown, a little bit more good news on the information of the funded status. And I'm going to really just focus on the column to the far right, that top percentage, 58.6%. That was the funded status of the retirement annuity as of June 30th, 2024. And the 59.1%, that's its growth, its improvement over the year to June 30th, 2024. And in the box below that, same column, you'll see the funded status for the health insurance trust as of June 30th, 2023 was 71.3%. It grew strongly over the year to 80.4% as of June 30th, 2024. So great news.
Bo, let me ask you a question on that, if you don't mind. Looking at assets and liabilities, looks like our assets grew by $1 billion.
Yes.
And our liabilities increased by $1.3 billion.
Yeah. Well, they increased, yes, sir. The liabilities, total liabilities, not the unfunded, but the total liabilities increased by about $1.3 billion.
Okay.
Okay. This chart reflects the annuity trust for the year ended June 30th, 2024 again. This is cash flow for that period of time. As we've discussed here many times in the past, we are experiencing negative cash flow that, is normal for a mature pension fund. So the actuarials will say, not just our actuary, but other actuaries. And I know this body has heard in the past from PPOB staff that there's a normal range for negative cash flow. It can get to be too much. And we were having that before we got the additional funding that we're getting now that started in 2017. And it was growing every year, and our actuary was concerned. But with the additional funding, we now have negative cash flow at a manageable level. We see it slightly decreased in 2024 from 4.02% in 2023 to 3.92% in 2024.
Okay, Bo, I'm going to interrupt you again. And before you do some simple math, I like dollars and cents instead of percentages. If I calculate it right, 3.92% of assets is about $1 billion. Am I correct?
Let's see. We reported negative cash flow, or cash flow. It's a function of two things, okay? One, it's contributions coming in, and two, it's benefits going out, okay? So if you look at just that, we reported as of June 30th, 2024, about $536 million in negative cash flow for the year. But as we always point out when we do the slides and reporting negative cash flow, again, it's just contributions coming in minus benefits going out. It does not include investment income. Dividends, interest, all of that includes that, but it doesn't include all of our investment income, for example, or unrealized and unrealized investment income. For example, when we are selling assets during the year, it doesn't include that. It doesn't include the increase in market value over the year. So you'll see that even in years where we have negative cash flow, which again is normal for a pension plan, that you'll see the value of the trust most years go up,
But what the 3.92%? What is the dollar amount again that reflects? I'm just trying to figure.
It looked like it was $536 million that we reported as of ending June 30th.
Okay. Well, when I did the math on what you showed your assets, it says of assets 3.92% of assets, and that figured out about $1 billion if I did the math right.
I'll double check that, sir.
But okay, I know in the past you've showed that numeric number instead of a percentage. I like to kind of have it. It helps my simple mind to get my arms around it. When you give it to me in dollars and cents rather than percentage, I don't have to think as much.
Yes, sir.
Chairman Johnson.
Thank you, Chairman. And honestly, I probably have to get even simpler than Chairman Higdon does. It's just the way my brain works. So if I heard you right, you say that the reason that the cash flow has reversed the negative trend, the bad trend, is because of additional funds that we've put in. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes, sir. Absolutely.
What are we going to do? What's going to happen when we hit that mandatory amount is so high that we can no longer put additional funds in? Are we going to start going in the wrong direction again? And if that's the case, what do we do to stop that? What do we do to get ahead of that now?
Well, if, as long as the full actuarial required contributions are being contributed to TRS as they have for the last 10 years, and we have about 20 years remaining, in that amortization period, as long as those continue, we will continue to have cash flow like this. If future budgets were to not provide the full actual required contributions, and depending on the extent that there was a shortfall, then you could see pressure on increasing negative cash flow.
I'm not sure that puts me at ease. The phrase that I heard was additional funding helped with the negative cash flow situation.
Yeah, so
if we stop the additional funding, are we going to start seeing a higher negative cash flow?
Well, certainly, because we've been receiving all along the fixed statutory contribution rate for the retirement system. The problem is that fixed statutory rate, although it's more than enough for normal costs and is providing for some of the unfunded liability, it's not providing enough for the unfunded liability. So that's why TRS was making budget requests for additional appropriations so that we had the full actually required contributions, both normal costs and an amount to pay off our that legacy unfunded liability over a 30-year period. And we've been doing that for about 20 years, but receiving that additional funds 2017. So, as long as that's why we're requesting this additional funding, but it will go away at some point. And that's actually the last year of additional funding requests to meet the ADEC would be 2047. And I have a slide, a few slides later, that shows when that happens and how that happens and the dramatic effect that has on the funding that would be required by the Commonwealth when that legacy unfunded liability is fully paid off.
Okay, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot. It's just when I hear the phrase additional funding and know that additional funding is an extra effort that may not be there 2, 3, 4, 5 years, 10 years from now, it's a red flag for me. I'm
sorry.
I think I'm going to turn it over to the senator because I think she's going to follow up on my chain of thought here, and we'll go for there.
Okay.
We may need to talk later about that.
Yes, sir.
Chairman McDaniel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Bo, I just want to kind of roughly continue down that line of thinking there. You reference an ADEC, but by statute, the funding for TRS is not governed by an ADEC. It's a percentage of payroll still, correct?
Yes, there is
while there is an obligation to meet the outlay to the teachers, the state's funding obligation is a percentage of payroll, not necessarily an ADEC.
There's not a specific reference to ADEC in our statutes. There is the fixed statutory rate. There is some language that we've discussed here. I know there's difference of interpretation about providing funding just to meet the needs to pay the benefits, but the words ADEC do not appear in regard to the retirement annuity trust. You're correct.
And then also as you referenced, the requests for at the time we called it an ARC or a supplemental payment, and we're on the ADEC now.
It's ADEC, yes.
Those go back 20 years. I believe we first started doing that in 16's budget cycle, correct? So which would have then been FY 17.
That's correct. That's when we started receiving the additional funding to fully meet the actuarially required contribution.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Berg has a question.
Thank you, sir. And again, this is going to belie my ignorance, but to me, when you think of putting in additional funding, you think of that as being over what you've already done so that it gets you towards your goal quicker. We get out of the hole that we're in faster, not that we're using additional funding just to keep up with the hole that we're in. And so that's my concern. And maybe it's just language, maybe just the words we're using. But if the actual amount that we're supposed to be contributing is not adequate, then we should know that. We shouldn't need to be relying on additional funding to make up for a deficit that we're aware of. Unless I'm wrong, unless that doesn't make sense somehow.
Well, Senator Berg, so what we're asking for, and I'm calling it supplemental funding because there's a fixed statutory rate, which is not enough to pay what's actually needed. So what we're talking about is, as Senator Daniel said, it's ADEC now. It's actually determined employer contribution. That's recognized by every pension fund, in the country. That's what they need in order to pay normal costs. And if there's an unfunded liability, like TRS's legacy unfunded liability, the amount that's needed to pay that off and over an amortized period. Like for us, it's over a 30-year period. That's how we started this. So we're not getting anything over and above what is actually required to pay the normal cost and to pay off that legacy unfunded liability over a 30-year period. And we're not paying it off earlier. We're just paying it on time according to the amortized schedule. So that's where we are. Does that answer your question, Senator Berg?
I think it does. And then it brings up a second question. If that is the case, if the statutory requirements aren't adequate to fund what we need to be funding, should we not just fix that? And then that way we don't have to be asking about additional contributions and how many additional contributions and where it's going. Why don't we just fix it so that we're funding what we know we need to fund?
That would be a policy decision for the Commonwealth. Certainly through the budget, the Commonwealth has met that need for the full actuarially.
What would the number be if we put it in statute? What would be
it would be the same number.
The same number?
It'd be the same number, yes.
A percentage. Thank you.
It's more an issue of nomenclature than anything. It's the same dollars. It's just, how you want to call it. You just want to refer to it as ADEC, or you want to break it down and say it's part fixed and it's part additional supplemental funding that is being appropriated by the General Assembly. Okay. This is an interesting slide, and it's an important slide. This is something our actuary does every year, and it's a gains-loss analysis. So what the actuary does is they look at what they anticipated was going to happen for the year. This is, of course, fiscal year 24, and then they compare that with what actually happened, because we have certain assumptions, like 7% assumed rate of return for the retirement annuity trust. Now, those assumptions, obviously, if they are exactly the same, it is pure coincidence. I don't think I've ever seen it happen where it's exactly the same, because they fluctuate. They go back and forth. So anyway, the actuary looks at that, and they conduct this analysis of key actuarial assumptions. And then they net that out to see if we had a gain or a loss for the year. Gains and losses are then amortized. It's called layered amortization. They are amortized over 20-year periods. We pay for those. They tweak our budget request to reflect whether we had a gain or loss for the year. So, this is how we make sure we stay on track to be 100% funded according to our amortization schedule, because every year we're taking a little step here to the left, a little step to the right. Now, these don't move the needle that much, and the reason is gains often offset the losses. In fact, of the 10 years we've been doing layered amortization, 4 years were positive, and those include recent years. As recently as 2022 was a positive year. So they kind of offset each other. So it's kind of a wash, roughly a wash. So let's just look at a few of these, and the top one's a very important one. I mean, investment return. It was a gain, because we had over 11%, 11.93%, almost 12% return for fiscal year 24. That's a second double-digit return in a row because we also had a double-digit return for 2023. So, very positive experience there, obviously. Salary increases is a negative. So what that means is that salaries in that year were increased greater than what our actuary anticipated. And the reason why that's a negative actuarial experience is because higher salaries translate into higher retirement allowances, because retirement allowances are based on a percentage of salaries. Turnover in retirement, so that was positive. That means we had more people, for us, refund accounts. They left and refunded accounts. In retirement, we had lower retirements than, or fewer retirements than were anticipated by actuary for the year. Mortality also, as we've presented to this board before, our board adopted some very conservative mortality tables as a result of that 2020 experience study that they conducted. And that was a positive 25.5 million for the year, that people were not living as long as for that year as the actuary had anticipated. New entrants, we get new teachers in every year, and there's a couple things going on that, but the easiest one to explain is we get people who come back to TRS with refunded accounts and they reinstate them, or have the potential to reinstate them, and that is that's a liability. That's a little bit of a liability there. Not a lot, but a little bit of a liability. So we had more new entrants than expected. That is largely, not solely, but largely the result of what we call direct rate smoothing that we've talked about here before. And to refresh everybody's memory, because it's been a while, that experience study that looked at what happened for the 5-year period ending June 30th, 2020. Again, just like this, but more in depth, it's a 5-year look back. What did the actuaries anticipate? What actually happened? And then the actuary looks at that, and then they make recommendations about changing assumptions. They can do that anytime, but that, with experience studies, that's when they really take an in-depth look, and they are more likely to make changes to assumptions. And they made changes to several assumptions, the mortality tables I talked about, but also to the assumed investment rate of return. It had been 7.5%, and they lowered it to 7.1%. And that adjustment, as the adjustments to all the actuarial assumptions, were recognized immediately for calculating liability. So we know what it does. But the actuary recommended, and a lot of retirement systems do this, particularly coming off, we had like a 30% return year, that instead of building that reduction from 7.5 to 7.1 in the budget and making that budget request to reflect that lowered assumption all in 1 year, phase it in over 5 years. The direct rate smoothing is what that's known in the actuarial world. So that's what we're doing, is slowly building that in. So getting that money all at once in year one, spreading it over 5 years, there's a cost to that. So that's why that's negative. And then, of course, there were no assumption changes for 2024, so that's why you see a 0.00 there.
Okay, Chairman Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, again. So looking at this, I just getting it down to the basics again. The $326.1 million that's identified with the salary increases. So is this the local school boards gave teachers increases that were higher than what the actuarial anticipated or what you guys thought was going to happen?
Correct.
And therefore, because they got increases, now our unfunded liability is higher than what we anticipated?
Correct. So our actuary, as a part of that 2020 experience study, lowered salary expectations to 2.5%, 2.75% total, payroll increase. 2.5% of that is inflation, and 0.25% is they anticipate as actual, salary increases over and above inflation. We saw for the last year increase of about 4.1%.
So is this loss accounted for in the unfunded liability slide that you showed that you had for us previously?
It is.
Okay.
And again, all of these, this nets out to be about a negative $363 million for the year. So as with gains, as with losses, We are capturing that with every budget request over a 20-year amortized period. So we make little adjustments here and there all along the way of that larger 30, now 20-year amortization period.
All right. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Chairman McDaniel.
Thank you. And Bo, I think the answer is going to be the same for all of these. But when we have this is basically a net present value impact to the funding ratio of the plan. So in essence, the impact of whatever salary increases came about over the last year, the net present value of that to the plan is a negative $326 million.
Yes.
Is that accurate? So it's not that KTRS this year is going to pay out another $326 million, or that is not a direct add-on to an additional request. That 326 might translate into another 42 to 45 million request per year from KTRS.
Yes, that's not an additional budget request in the next budget. That is going to be amortized over 20 years. Yes,
But
sir.
it will. Each of these will result in some way, shape, or form. Like the gains will result in a little bit less of a request. The salary increase is a little bit more, et cetera, on down through there. But so you said that the salary is based on a 4.1%, and that is strictly a local board decision, but it does fall to the Commonwealth. Outside of the teacher contribution will obviously, their dollars will go up just a little bit because they're on a percentage.
That's correct.
Okay, good.
And that actually helps a little bit, getting additional contributions in. But overall, with the increase in retirement allowances being by this increased salaries, individual salaries, across the state, it's a negative experience.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Please proceed, Bo.
This is pretty self-explanatory, but it is sort of a greater breakdown on where contributions are coming from for the Retirement Annuity Trust, and it's a 5-year.
Bo, back up there, if you don't mind, to the previous slide. Senator Berg has a question. I also have one.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Senator Berg.
Do we have the ability, since, obviously we're lowering our expected rate of return over a 5-year period by 0.4%, do we have the ability for next year to change the assumptions on the salary increases so that we don't have this same shortfall, or that has to wait?
And one thing I need to make sure I'm clear about this, and that is that 7.1% reduction was acknowledged immediately.
Oh, it was?
For liabilities. So liabilities went up, that valuation, because we went to 7.1% from 7.5%. So, less investment.
The liability didn't actually go up. The number that we have as our liability went up because we projected less of a rate of return.
The actual liability did go up,
but we
how
acknowledge.
Our budget request normally, would go up quite a bit when you go from 7.5 to 7.1% in 1 year, over 8%. So instead of asking for all of that in the next budget, that 8% increase, we were asking for 1.72% per year over 5 years. So it's kind of easing into the budget, so there's not as much volatility in our budget request. Again, that's a common practice.
Understand.
Okay. And
will we be able to account for the incorrect assumption in salary increases for next year? Or is that a number we're stuck with for a while?
Well, the actuary can do that any time, but this is very important. These assumptions are long-term assumptions. There are a lot of years where 2.75 is too high, and there's some years where it's too low. So we're not trying to chase the volatility of wages or the volatility of market returns, like this. They fluctuate wildly, or can. We're trying to just follow and have an average, to have an even path. And that's why our actuary does this 5-year look back, because then we have some experience. What are things really changing, or we just had a couple of up years, but now they're being offset by a couple of down years, or vice versa. These are all long-term assumptions.
I understand, but we also know that we have a teacher shortage in the state, that ideally we are going to be hiring a lot more teachers if we can get over our teacher shortage, and that their salaries are increasing. So, some of this stuff we can predict. And I personally, being extremely conservative financially, like to make sure that I never predict in the wrong direction. I always want a little play on my side. So if we predicted 2.5 and we actually spent 4.1, I would want that for my personal finances corrected now. I would not want, and I would want it corrected to a number that I will never exceed. That's me. And that's, so anyhow, that's it. Thank you.
And I will note, Senator Berg, to your question, that our next actual experience study will be for the 5-year period ending this fiscal year, June 30th, 2025. Thank you.
Okay, Bo, my question was at negative 284 million there at the bottom, and the description of that is one that always interests me. Always want to know what other is.
It's again, that's largely direct rate smoothing. They're factoring that.
Direct rate smoothing is a board decision that does. How does that work?
Recommendation by the actuary that instead of, when we reduce the assumed rate of return from 7.5 to 7.1%, instead of making that budget request all in 1 year of, I believe, the lower 8%, we're going to phase that in over 5 years at 1.72% per year. So, anytime you're not getting these dollars in immediately, and you're transitioning to provide less volatility in the budget, then getting dollars a little bit later, there's a cost to that, and that represents a lot of this 284 represents the cost in doing that. It's not all of it. There's other little things that go in here, but that's a large part of it.
Would it include the year, I think, was it 23, we took some pretty substantial losses? Would that number be in this also? That you did smoothing on that also, correct?
Are you talking about the investment returns?
Right.
Yeah, so that was 2022 when we had the bad investment returns. We had a negative 10 point something following the 30% the year before. So because we do 5-year smoothing of it, our actuary does 5-year smoothing of investment returns, just like the other systems do, then we still have that bad year in there, the 2022 year.
But that's included in this number.
It was included investment return. No, I'm sorry. That investment return is just for the year. That would not be in. I do not think that is in this.
Well, that's
box,
why it's
I'll
always
confirm.
good to find out what other is.
I will confirm that specific item is considered. Not to my knowledge, but it's possible.
Okay, please proceed.
So again, this slide is fairly self-explanatory. It's a breakdown of who's making contributions to the retirement annuity trust. It reflects backward over a 5-year period. And we'll focus on the bottom row there just so you'll see what it is. The first numbers to the left after the year, that's the state unfunded liability payment. That is the additional funding we're getting over that fixed statutory rate. For the Commonwealth, it's 13.105% for individuals who became members of the system before July 1st, 2008. It's 14.105%. And let me mind, there's a 0.75% that goes to health insurance there, so we subtract that out. But 14.105% for members, people become members on or after July 1st, 2008. And you can see that additional is the biggest budget request that we have. And again, this is not anything over and above that ADEC, the actual required amount. It is what is needed to make sure we're paying just exactly the actual required amount, or ADEC. And you'll see it's out $646 million, in 2024. State employer fixed, those are those percentages I just gave you, minus the 0.75, $436 million in 2024. Other employers. We have other employers who they pay the employer contribution, and that's $94 million. And that would include, I believe, federally funded positions in the school districts.
But Yeah, it'd be nice. Will you make a note and like to know what other employers are for our next meeting?
Oh, yes, sir. Well, that's
Unless you could tell it, unless you know all of them off the top of your head now. An example of who other employers would be.
that would be federally funded positions in the school districts. About 10% of the positions in school districts are federally funded, and under the statute, the school district pays the employer contribution on those positions. And we also we have universities, and we have this is a very small amount. We have a very few. These are statutory organizations. They have roles in government, but they call them quasi-governmental entities. There's only a handful of them, and their membership is very small. So that's almost nothing out of this number.
Okay. All right. But I still would like to see a list of those, if you don't, for next meeting, if you will.
Yes, sir. Be glad to.
Okay. Or email them to us. Be fine.
And then the last column there is members, and you'll see $386 million were contributed by members for the fiscal year.
So to get the state contribution, you would take those columns and move to the right, and looks like 23, 22, 23, and 24 would really go all the way back up to 20. Would exceed $1 billion a year in state contributions, correct?
That is correct. I will note, because I know probably some of you all are noticing, that one of those numbers is much larger than the others, and that's for fiscal year 22 at $1,172 million. That was the year that the Commonwealth made a special appropriation of $479 million to pay off sick leave liability for retired teachers.
Yeah.
So that's why you have that one outlier number.
I would still want to thank Chairman Petrie and Chairman McDaniel for making sure that we got that done. That was those green box dollars. Getting rid of those was very good. Of course, I guess I also want to point out some of the things that many on this committee are concerned about. It's $1 billion a year now. And we're looking at two budget sessions away from anticipated for that being $2 billion a year in contributions. Am I correct?
So with the 2024 valuation that just came out, then they do 30-year projections and have been doing 30-year projections for years. The $2 billion mark would be hit in 2035. Now you have a couple years before that, it's 1.9, and a couple years before that, it's 1.8. But you do see that increasing over the years. In the out years, you see it decrease less, and you see it get flat, and then you even see it start to decline a little bit in the final year of the amortization period. And I have a slide that graphically shows, what that kind of looks like.
Okay. All right.
And here it is. So this board has, I know, seen this slide before, but it's always good as a refresher to revisit this slide. The top box shows, and that dark blue line reflects going from present outward, or from 2025 to 2053. It reflects, that dark blue line reflects the funded ratio over the years. And you can see where we are now. It's kind of flat, and that's what our actuaries have been projecting for years. In the early years of the amortization period, it's kind of flat. But then after a few years, about 2031, if you look at that dark blue line, you see it starts to move up. It starts to move up pretty well, and then it accelerates. And again, I've used the example, and it's not exact, but it's akin to a home mortgage. Early years, you're paying more interest than principal, and then after a while, you start paying more and more principal and less interest, and finally it flips. You pay more principal than interest. Same thing happens here, that we get to a period where we get better funded, and we have better funded status, more money in the fund, where to earn investment returns on, and it really accelerates. So good news there. The light lines there, the gold lines. The blue lines, those reflect, what if instead of 7.1%. The higher ones, well, we got 8.1%. And that's our 30-year return is 8.1%. Or what if it were 1% lower and 6.1%? You can see what the trajectory would be. It's a sensitivity analysis related to variable investment returns. And then, of course, the gold line is the unfunded liability. So you see it was anticipated that those will continue to increase a little bit, and then you see at the same period of time, even a little earlier maybe, but same period of time about, they start to decrease. And then that continues downward until we get to zero unfunded liabilities, meaning that we're 100% funded in the retirement annuity trust.
I guess I looked last night as it looked like in 2017, and this is not dollar-wise, but we were 56.4% funded 2017, and of course 2024, which you show us today, we're 59.1% funded, an increase of 2.7% over 8 years. That is moving very slowly, and I think we put about $6 billion in since 2016. It's going very slowly.
I would say that, and of course, those changing assumptions, both assumed rate of return on investments and mortality, both of those kind of moved us back a little bit. I mean, our actuaries adopted some very conservative investment return assumptions at 7.1.
I remember those. Thank you.
So in the bottom box there, you'll see the required contributions from the Commonwealth. And the bright green line there, the bold green line, you can see how those continue to go up, as we've talked about. And then you see they're starting to kind of flatten out a bit. They start going down a little bit and flatten out until we get to 2047. And at 2047, when the retirement annuity trust is 100% funded, contributions from the state will plummet. At that point, we're going to be about the same cost as Social Security, but a better benefit. Because we have actual assets, so we're investing and earning returns on, we can provide a better benefit. Plus, we're a Social Security replacement plan, so we need to replicate Social Security, plus provide some measure of retirement for the Commonwealth's teachers. And then, of course, we have the lighter green lines. Again, that's just a sensitivity analysis for what if returns were 8.1% instead of 7.1, or were they 6.1 instead of 7.1. Again, the long-term return is 30 years, 8.1. Here's another, this is a similar breakdown, but this is for the health insurance trust, about where contributions are coming from. And again, these are in millions, and I'll focus on the bottom row there, 2024. The state provided $96 million for the year, and other employers provided $128 million. That's mostly school districts because, as we've discussed here many times, before 2010, school districts weren't contributing anything to the health insurance trust, but as a result of that 2010 share responsibilities legislation, they're paying 3% into the health insurance trust now. So that's not all of it, but that's most of it. And then members and retirees paid $155 million during the year into the health insurance trust. Active members pay 3% out of their paycheck into the health insurance trust. Retired members under age 65 pay to the health insurance trust, or they pay towards the cost of their health care. They pay towards the cost of their health care an amount equivalent to the Medicare Part B premium that is paid by members 65 and over to federal government. As a result of that 2010 legislation, retirees under age 65 are making that same payment, but just towards the cost of their health insurance, in addition to just whatever the cost of that plan is. So if like about a $700 health insurance plan right now, and it's using a hypothetical, they'll pay about $200 of it, but actually a little bit more probably, but in that neighborhood.
Bo, I think the trust fund is supposed to hit 100% funded. What's your projection now? I saw one that was 2027. Is that still?
Yes. Last year we were looking. It was reported that the actuaries had projected 2028. That was the 2023 valuation, but in the current valuation for 2024, they are projecting 2027, a year earlier. And as always, there is a big caveat here. I like to note one: we need for medical inflation, on average, to stay fairly constant or near what it has been since 2010, since share responsibility came into effect. We also need for these federal subsidies that we are getting to remain in place, and we need to have the same access that we have now to formulary drug rebates. The federal subsidies and the formulary drug rebates, they pay for about $300 million a year for the cost of retirees' health insurance. They pay for most of it. That's very important. So here is the budget request, just some budget numbers, and you can see for 2025 pension, $769.8 million. That is what we asked for that comes out of the general fund budget directly as an extra appropriation. Thanks. There is an addition to that. Kentucky Department of Education makes a budget request through SEEK for those fixed employer statutory contributions that I talked about earlier. That's an additional $460 million in SEEK funding for a total of $1.347 billion in 2025, the current fiscal year. Next year, $953 million out of the general fund budget, supplemental funding. And then we have an additional $470 million projected that we would need from the SEEK budget for a total of $1.46 billion total. Very preliminarily for 2027, and this is going to be based on the 24 valuation, but we're looking at $1.077 billion for the supplemental appropriation out of the general fund budget. And 2028, because of that lag, that's based on the 2025 valuation, which we don't have yet, and we don't have a valuation yet for that budget year.
But what will the 2027 with the normal cost added to it? What will that? What put 1.5, 1.6 billion?
Well, the normal cost, is captured within that fixed statutory rate, which pays normal cost and some of the unfunded liability. But I think probably we're going to see something like we saw $460 million out of the SEEK budget in 25, $470 million in 26. So slight increase. We talked about salaries, payroll's gone up by 4.1% over the year. So however total payroll increases, and that's not going to increase a whole lot just because it costs a lot of, 4.1% is a lot higher than what we saw for about, many years there. In the early 2000s, teachers weren't getting much in the way of salary increases. So I think it'll be fairly consistent. It'll go up marginally or measurably. This is the last slide that I have, and this is a breakdown on just state contributions to the retirement system. In the top portion is that statutory fixed rate, those SEEK dollars, and we'll just run quickly through the numbers in the second column from the right, and you'll see the pension received $430 million in SEEK funding for fiscal year 25. Insurance 28.2, total SEEK $458.2 million. That next group of numbers in the middle, this is that supplemental funding from the general fund, $769.8 million to the pension, $76.9 million for the state's portion of shared responsibility. That's the cost of under 65 retirees' health insurance minus what they pay, that about $200 a month. Total $846.7 million coming in there from the state general fund. And then we just have the total. So 1.199 pension, 105.1 insurance for a total of 1.304.9. And that concludes my presentation today. And with that, I would be glad to take any questions there may be about my presentation or about anything else regarding TRS.
Yeah. 2 meetings ago, Bo, we asked you about Gary Harvin was here with you, and we talked about the administrative reg done by the board for reporting of the pension or the sick days from schools, from the districts, reporting every year, getting that reporting. And Has there been any movement on that at the board level?
Yes, sir, there has been. I know there was interest in that from members of the General Assembly and this board. So we took that to our Board of Trustees at their September board meeting. They approved a regulation requiring school districts to report total accumulated sick leave on an annual basis. That regulation has been filed with Administrative Regulation Review Subcommittee, published in the Kentucky Administrative Register, and now we're just waiting to see if anybody wants to attend the public hearing. But it's in the pipeline and moving. Yes, sir.
You know, Bo, we need to put that in the history books of good government. Would you all a request by this board and to you all to do the administrative reg instead of us doing it in statute? Congratulations! Thank you for listening to us and doing that. I'm impressed.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
One other thing. Now, speaking of the board, is it true that you have a board policy that you never request less in the next year, or you never request less for funding than you did the previous year?
That's in the TRS funding policy approved by the board, yes, sir.
So you never give us a discount if we...
And I don't really think that policy will come into play for, several years, but we'll see. But
I'm just, now, as we're talking about policy, I just wanted to see if that one was still in effect.
Yes, sir.
Maybe you could shock us twice in a year and revisit that.
Yes, sir.
Just thank you, Bo. Anybody have a question? Thanks again, Bo. Okay, thank you for that, Bo. You're excused. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This hasn't been. You might want to make a note of it. Our next meeting is December the 9th at 3:00. That hasn't been revealed anywhere yet. We just had that discussion last night and this morning. So December 9th at 3:00. Do we have